Each Monday at 6:42 a.m., Jonah Redd stepped into the Lantern Diner off Route 17, his gait stiff from years of wear. He moved with the certainty of ritual, sliding into the corner booth beneath the shadow of a faded American flag that hung near the back. The staff never asked for his order. It arrived exactly 7 minutes later: black coffee, wheat toast, 2 eggs over easy, and a side of applesauce. He said little, nodded once to the waitress, and kept his eyes fixed on the window facing the parking lot. Draped over the seat beside him was his weathered bomber coat, sleeve rolled just enough to reveal a faded patch, a broken dagger inside a half-circle, the insignia of the Ghost Division. Its threadbare stitching carried more weight than any words he might have offered. No one asked about it. No one dared. Some customers recognized him. Others just saw another old vet with calloused hands and a permanent scowl. The regulars understood that booth wasn't available to anyone else on Monday mornings. Not because it was reserved, but because it belonged to something older than the diner itself. Outside, frost clung to windshields. Inside, time slowed. The jukebox was always silent while Jonah sat. He read a small, battered paperback with no cover, his finger resting lightly between pages when the waitress passed. Sometimes he spoke, a simple "thanks" or a quiet "you too" on his way out. But mostly, he listened. To the sizzle in the kitchen, to boots scuffing linoleum, to the things people said when they thought no one was listening. Jonah Redd never stayed past 7:12. At that time, without fail, he folded a napkin in quarters, set it beside the salt shaker, and rose with a grunt. Coat on his back, patch facing outward, he left the same way he came in, quietly, steadily, like a man still marching. Jonah Redd wasn't always a man of silence. In 1983, he had a voice that rang across engine bays and training hangars. Stationed first at Fort Bragg, then briefly overseas, he served as an aviation technician in the 82nd Airborne, known not for being the loudest or the fastest, but for being dependable, even when nothing else was. It was in the arid outskirts of Dahuk, during an operation that was never officially named, where Jonah's fate was quietly sealed. The unit was under strength, the airstrip too narrow, the intelligence half wrong. When the ambush struck just before sunrise, it was Jonah's voice shouting over the radio, calling for a Mayday redirect while bullets carved holes in the rotor assembly. One bird went down, just past the ridge. 2 crewmen ejected safely. The third, Private Hensley, was found bleeding beneath the tail boom, pinned by twisted metal. Jonah pulled him out with his bare hands, carrying him 2 full miles under the heat and dust. He arrived at the rendezvous point with torn knuckles and a ruptured tendon, never filing the rescue under his name. When asked later, he simply said, he needed lifting. I was there. It earned him an unofficial place among the quiet legends of Division Grey, the Ghost Division, as they were known among themselves. Their missions weren't recorded in ceremony, their casualties not always listed. They were the repairmen, the medics, the ones who swept through in the aftermath and stitched up what could be saved. Jonah thrived there. His tools never gleamed, but they worked. His uniform always bore the scent of engine grease and desert air. Back stateside, he requested Miller Creek, Kentucky, not because it was home, but because no one else requested it. The town's VFW post was closed, the last commander having passed away the winter before Jonah's return. He arrived in a truck with 1 duffel and a toolbox, and without any formal welcome, went about fixing what was broken. He found the war memorial on his 3rd day, slanted, cracked, names worn by moss and time. There were 4 granite markers, each tilted like teeth missing their gum line. Flags had once circled the site, now gone. The benches were rusted, inscriptions eaten by weather. Jonah stood there long, as if trying to remember something he hadn't seen yet. He returned the next morning with a rag, a wire brush, and a can of clear coat. He started on the smallest plaque, not speaking, not asking. The name F. Carson was the first he restored, etching in gold leaf enamel with the steadiness of someone tracing an oath. Over the next year, he returned weekly. He brought his own sandpaper, chisels, and occasionally an old canteen of black coffee. He kept a logbook, handwritten, with every name he'd restored, every date he'd touched the stone. It wasn't for show. It was the kind of record he would have filed in the field, if anyone had cared to receive it. He fixed the outer bench one spring after a late frost, replacing its legs with reclaimed cedar. He did it alone. There were no press photos, no committee permits. When he noticed the flagpoles had rusted through, he cut and welded new ones from spare piping in his garage. At the top of each, he mounted a single bronze ring, one for each unit division that had served from their county. He paid for the parts himself. The receipts were folded inside an envelope in his glove box, never submitted anywhere. Once, a local named Raylan Carver, an older veteran who ran the gas station off Main, asked Jonah why he did it. Jonah was wiping the grit from his hands with a mechanic's cloth, and he looked up briefly before replying, because someone should. It was the longest sentence most people ever heard him say. There were moments, though, small, almost invisible, when Jonah's past showed through. One 4th of July, the town held a parade. A school float passed by, bearing a banner that read, "Our Hometown Heroes," featuring laminated photos of service members past and present. Jonah stood near the back, behind the rows of folding chairs. When the float paused momentarily near his corner, a gust of wind caught the banner and flapped one of the photos loose. A boy, maybe 9 or 10, rushed forward to catch it. As he returned it to the float, he looked back at Jonah and said, "My grandpa was on here. He's not anymore." Jonah took off his cap and nodded once. The boy smiled and ran back. It wasn't that Jonah lacked words. He simply didn't spend them unless they mattered. The war plaques near Miller Creek soon drew attention, not from city officials, but from the people who passed them daily. Tourists stopped to take photos. A few veterans from nearby towns began leaving small tokens, a coin, a ribbon, a folded flag patch. Someone planted lilacs near the stone edge. Jonah never acknowledged them, but he watered the flowers whenever he passed. He repainted the base of the flagpole each Memorial Day, always at dawn. The flags themselves, fresh each year, were hoisted in silence. If anyone else came, they stood behind him, waiting, understanding the ritual wasn't for show. Back at home, his garage resembled a field depot. Old radios, deconstructed generators, wore memorabilia in crates marked only with black tape. But in the corner, beneath a single dangling bulb, was a shelf lined with his logbooks, 3 of them, bound in canvas, each marked with the same initials, Jr. MC Site. When the first filled up, he started the second without changing format. When the third began, he paused on the first page a little longer than usual. Jonah Redd had built a service after his service. One name at a time. One bolt, one nail, one brass ring. Not for medals. Not for pride. Just because the job hadn't been finished yet. Trevor Gant was not a cruel man by intention. He came to public service fresh from a 2-year community college program in municipal operations, eager to climb ranks and implement modern order in the aging infrastructure of Miller Creek. In a town where routine was sacred, Trevor saw inefficiency. Where others saw sentiment, he saw liability. And in Jonah Redd, he saw disorder. It started with a letter, printed in official language and clipped to the War Memorial's new cedar bench. Unauthorized structure on municipal property. Please cease further alteration pending review. Jonah read it, folded it neatly, and placed it inside the toolbox he kept beneath the bench. He didn't respond. Trevor followed up with a second letter, this time certified, and when that didn't work, he visited the site himself. Jonah was kneeling at the time, brushing lichen from the base of the 1944 plaque. Trevor cleared his throat. Jonah didn't look up. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to stop this work. The city hasn't approved any modifications to this site. You're in violation of Section 14B, Subcode 3, regarding alteration of public memorials. Still silent, Jonah leaned forward, gently etched the groove around a worn name, H. Decker, then stood. He turned, gave a single glance at Trevor, and began collecting his brushes. Not in haste, but with the dignity of someone who had done this before, packed his kit under orders, moved along quietly. Trevor interpreted the silence as resistance. The next week, the flowers disappeared. Then the flags. Then the bench. The plaque Jonah had just finished was removed and replaced with the original weathered one, cracks and all. A laminated notice was stapled to a tree nearby, preservation site under official review. Do not interfere. Jonah responded the only way he knew, he came earlier. Before dawn, before city workers opened the maintenance shed. He worked with a red-filtered flashlight strapped to his head, every motion practiced and reverent. When the wind stirred leaves across the path, he paused until they settled. When squirrels darted by, he nodded as if excusing their urgency. Trevor began to arrive earlier too. He drove by in his city vehicle, circled twice, and once stopped to photograph Jonah kneeling by the 1951 panel. You need a permit, he said from the driver's seat, voice carrying just enough disdain to stain the morning air. Jonah didn't reply. But the next morning, the panel gleamed in new gold. Trevor issued a formal citation. He tried to serve it in person, but Jonah never answered his door. He left it in the mailbox, then followed with a notice taped to the Lantern Diner's front window. It was removed within an hour, by someone else. Because, quietly, others had begun to take note. Lyle Jenkins, the retired custodian who still folded the town's flag at sunrise every Sunday, began passing by Miller Creek more frequently. He'd stop, hands in his jacket pockets, and stand motionless at a respectful distance. When Trevor questioned him one morning, Lyle said, just remembering names. He didn't explain further. Then there was Nina Alvarez. Her fifth-grade class took their usual spring walk past the memorial grounds, clipboards in hand, sketching the plaques for their local history unit. She noticed the changes. The new polish. The fixed bench, then its sudden disappearance. She noticed Jonah's careful presence and the way he moved like he was sweeping not just the stone but time itself. She didn't interfere. But the next week, she left a coffee on the wall. Still warm, no note. Trevor noticed it an hour later and threw it away. Publicly, Trevor insisted he was preserving the legal integrity of town property. He scheduled a council review, presented photo slides of vandalized installations, and outlined liability concerns. What if someone trips on his tools, he asked the room. What precedent does this set? Privately, he bristled at Jonah's unshakable calm. Rules were meant to bring order, and yet the more he enforced them, the more the town seemed to shift away from his reach. Even Councilwoman Everett, a stickler for proper procedure, asked mildly, has he damaged anything, Trevor? Trevor didn't have a satisfying answer. Still, the city placed orange tape across the path to the plaques. It fluttered like a warning in the breeze. Jonah stepped over it every morning without pause. He never looked toward the street, never altered his path. He resumed his work in silence. People began to follow. A young mechanic named Jess Turlow started arriving just before dawn, standing at the far edge of the clearing. She didn't speak, just watched. On her third morning, she brought a thermos and placed it beside the stone closest to the trail. Lyle Jenkins sat on a nearby log with a pocket radio turned low to static. Even Nina Alvarez began leaving a candle at the base of the hill every Sunday night, electric, safe, barely aglow. None of them spoke of it. No group was formed, no post was made online. But something had changed. Trevor noticed. He asked Chief Denton if it qualified as an unlawful gathering. They're not obstructing, Denton said, chewing his toothpick. Looks like remembering to me. But Trevor couldn't let it go. Not yet. He printed new signs. He filed for a temporary restoration freeze order. He demanded surveillance consideration from the mayor's office. This man, he insisted, is rewriting public memory without authorization. But memory, as he'd come to learn, does not wait for permission. Nina Alvarez kept her silence for 2 years. Each spring, she led her class past Miller Creek. She paused by the plaques, not to give a lecture, but to let the children see. She handed them paper and pencils. Some drew the benches. Others the flags. A few sketched Jonah Redd, crouched with brush in hand, bomber jacket hunched against the morning chill. No one had to tell them who he was. They just saw. She never gave his name aloud. Not because she didn't know it, but because she didn't know the whole story. Jonah never introduced himself, never asked for anything. He was simply there. Always there. One morning, her nephew Theo asked, "Why doesn't he talk?" Nina only said, "Some people speak with their hands instead." Lyle Jenkins understood. He'd folded the town's flag at the courthouse since retirement. Every Sunday morning, rain or frost, 6 a.m. sharp. When he passed Jonah the first time, he saluted. Jonah didn't return it, just gave a nod. But from then on, Lyle stopped by Miller Creek after the flag, sometimes to sweep, sometimes just to stand. He didn't help with the plaques. He wasn't there to interfere. He was there to witness. Others followed. Clara Holt, a widow, left white roses at the oldest marker. Denny Crow, a quiet boy, sat beside one nameplate each year on his father's birthday, holding a toy truck. Someone began trimming back the path. Someone else peeled off the city's warning signs by evening. No one admitted to doing it. No one spoke of it. At the Lantern Diner, regulars noticed when Jonah's hands were bandaged. No one asked why, but extra bacon appeared on his plate. His coffee came to go before he ordered it. When another citation was taped to the window, Rita Mae tore it down without a word. She dropped it in the fryer oil. And then there was the little girl, Tessa. 8 years old, purple boots, a stuffed rabbit under one arm. She came every Friday with her grandmother. She'd walk up the stone path, stop at the third plaque, the one Trevor had removed twice and Jonah had quietly replaced, and place a tiny pebble beside it. Some weeks it sparkled, others it was painted with flowers. Every week, a different one. One afternoon, Jonah looked up from his brush. Tessa waved. "Thank you for fixing them," she said. Jonah blinked. Then quietly replied, "You're welcome." It was the first time Nina ever heard him speak. A few days later, Nina left a coffee on the bench. No note, just a folded sleeve with the words, "We see you. We remember them." By morning, it was gone. Trevor Gant noticed the growing attention and grew restless. What he saw as defiance was, in fact, reverence. He proposed a city ordinance to prohibit unauthorized commemorative activity in public spaces. The council stalled the motion. No one seconded it. Then a plaque went missing, an actual theft. No vandalism, just gone. Trevor publicly blamed Jonah. The community pushed back. Letters appeared in the town paper, "I've seen him work in the snow. He never takes. He restores." Trevor's voice began to fade beneath the quiet resistance. Winter arrived. Jonah worked through sleet and ice. One morning, frost glittered across each plaque, letters cleared, snow brushed gently aside. Nina's class passed again, and for once, Jonah looked up. Just for a second. He nodded at the students. They nodded back. Lyle began leaving a candle each night in a glass case by the flag. Someone else lit a second one. By February, 6 candles burned regularly. No names. No dedications. Just fire. Jonah never addressed it. But soon, a second brush began appearing on the bench. Clean, dry, waiting. At dawn, it was taken. By 7, it was back, used, rinsed, ready. No one claimed it. No one needed to. It became a ritual. No spoken pact. No coordination. Someone had joined him. Maybe Lyle. Maybe one of Nina's older students. It didn't matter who. The city backed off. But Trevor did not. One last time, he escalated, this time to the state. He filed a report with the Department of Historical Sites, accusing Jonah of unlicensed restoration endangering public heritage. He included photos, maps, even affidavits he'd drafted himself. He demanded removal, sanctions, criminal action. A month passed. Then, a courier arrived, not for Trevor, but for Jonah. The envelope was sealed in red wax, bearing the state's preservation emblem. Nina saw it resting beside him one morning. Jonah stared at it a long time. He didn't open it. He folded the letter, placed it in his coat, and resumed work on a nameplate worn soft from decades of wind and rain. His hands moved slow but sure. The morning air steamed with his breath. Beside him, the second brush had already been taken. And just before the bell rang for school, it returned, rinsed, rested, and waiting. The dedication for the new visitor center brought out nearly everyone. Chairs lined the courthouse lawn, flags danced overhead, and the town brass, Mayor Lenton, the chamber rep, a handful of scouts and volunteers, stood proud beneath the white canopy. The mic popped as speakers read scripted praises for civic growth, legacy, and the importance of remembering. Jonah Redd stood far in the back, behind the last row of folding chairs. He hadn't received an invitation, but neither had he expected one. He wore the same bomber coat, collar raised against the breeze, hands buried in his pockets. His presence, though unnoticed by officials, hadn't gone unseen. When Commander Diane Falk took the podium, the tone shifted. A hush fell. She spoke not like a guest but like someone reclaiming something lost. "I've served 32 years, she said, scanning the crowd. "I've saluted more coffins than I care to count. But there are still stories that never made the record books. And one of those stories is here today." She stepped down from the stage. The crowd turned as she walked, not toward a veteran in a seat of honor, but toward the man behind them all. Jonah Redd, she said, facing him directly, was the fifth man in Ghost Division. The one who carried the others out of Sector Grey. He never gave a statement. He never accepted recognition. He just kept walking. The silence cracked. Commander Falk raised her hand in salute. Jonah didn't return it. But he nodded, once, firm. Some clapped. Some stood. Some just stared. For years, Jonah had been an invisible fixture. Now, suddenly, he was a story unfolding in real time. He turned, quietly, and left the gathering. That night, the footage aired on local television. Online, the clip spread, Commander Falk, the quiet nod, the man who never sought the microphone. People asked who Jonah was. Nina Alvarez's students posted sketches. Lyle Jenkins called him the keeper of names. And the town, slowly, shifted. The following week, a letter came addressed to Jonah. No return label, only a gold ink seal from the State Preservation Council. Inside, a permit. Honorary Guardian, Miller Creek Memorial Grounds. Effective indefinitely. No expiration. No condition. Jonah didn't speak about it. He pinned it to the inside of his coat and kept working. The city, sensing the shift, backed off. Trevor Gant, notably silent, was pulled from active enforcement and reassigned to administrative review. No one protested. No one celebrated. It simply happened. In May, Jonah was invited, quietly, respectfully, to the local school. Nina met him at the door, led him to the classroom. Her students waited in a semicircle. Jonah sat, pulled out his logbook, and began to read. One name. A pause. Another. Then another. No stories. No history. Just names. The room stayed still. A boy took notes. A girl drew a red flower. When Jonah closed the book, no one clapped. They only nodded. That afternoon, a fresh bench appeared at Miller Creek. No plaque. No signature. Just clean wood, sanded smooth, set beneath a cluster of young poplars. Jonah didn't question it. He only left his brush there the next morning, just in case someone else might use it. By summer, the creek path saw more footprints. Not tourists, locals. Children with sketch pads. Veterans with old jackets. Teachers. Couples. The area remained simple. No gates, no fanfare. Just space held with care. And always, Jonah. He still arrived before sunrise. Still left before the heat. Still returned each Monday to the Lantern Diner at exactly 6:42 a.m., his coat slung across the booth, coffee untouched until Rita brought the second cup, for the seat across from him. One morning, a small case appeared behind the diner counter. Inside sat a medal, red-striped, silver-crossed, its edges dulled by time. Commander Falk had left it there without ceremony. Jonah noticed it. Said nothing. Later, he asked, "No sign?" Rita shook her head. Didn't need one. October brought a hush over Miller Creek. The trees turned brittle gold, their leaves skittering across the worn trail where Jonah's boots still passed, slow and constant. The bench under the poplars now bore smooth wear from use. Sometimes, a thermos sat beside it. Sometimes, a drawing from a child. And sometimes, a small folded flag, left without note, taken without fuss. Jonah never changed pace. His logbook had grown thicker, pages filled with names, the ink pressed deep into the lines as though he were writing each one for the last time. He never asked for help, but help began arriving anyway. One morning, Theo Alvarez met him at the edge of the path, already holding a brush and cloth. "You missed a spot," the boy said, grinning. Jonah didn't smile, but he passed the brush. By winter, more joined him. Lyle Jenkins came every second Thursday, folding his old service hat into his coat pocket as he walked. Clara Green from the florist shop brought cut stems in spring, always tied with twine, never plastic. Even Trevor Gant returned, without a badge, once leaving behind a brand new brass plate labeled simply, "To the ones we didn't see soon enough." Jonah never commented. The school visits continued. Once a semester, Nina invited him to read from the logbook. He brought a small box now too, containing faded patches, fragments of uniform, and one snapped dog tag with a crack right through the name. He'd hold up each item, pause, then place it back in the box. The students came to call it the silence kit. One girl, Elsie, asked to hold the dog tag. Jonah handed it over carefully, then watched as she ran her fingers along the broken edge. "Why's it split?" she asked. He replied simply, "So someone would notice it." Later, she drew it in charcoal and pinned the drawing beside the diner case, where Falk's medal still rested. Rita left it there. Jonah never asked why. One Monday in February, Jonah didn't come at 6:42 a.m. The coat was still there, but it hung differently. Folded. Pressed. The Ghost Division patch faced outward. Tucked in the collar was a stitched note, "Not every light shines with noise." Rita said nothing. She placed 2 coffees on the table that morning anyway, then dimmed the lights around the booth. The town understood. No announcement followed. No headline. Just absence, and the soft weight it carried. 3 days later, a letter arrived at Nina's classroom. It was addressed not to her, but to the students who still listen. Inside, a single page from the logbook. Every name, carefully rewritten. And one final line, centered. People forget loud. But silence, real silence, remembers forever. The mayor issued an informal proclamation a week later, renaming the Miller Creek path to Red Line. No ribbon was cut. No ceremony was planned. A boy from the high school shop class carved the name into a pine plank and mounted it on the trailhead. People took turns repainting it each season. In the spring, Theo led a cleanup of the older stones with 4 classmates and 2 retired teachers. They worked in shifts, using Jonah's brushes. Fox sent new ones from her post upstate, addressed simply to whoever carries the next step. Jonah's logbook, rescued from his booth by Rita, was placed in a glass case at the library. Beneath it sat a tablet with a single button labeled Read Aloud. When pressed, Jonah's voice emerged in a quiet recording, reading the names from start to end. No introductions. No music. Just names. At the creek, Theo eventually began carrying a book of his own, smaller and bound in dark green canvas. He didn't call it a log. He called it marks. He filled it slowly, each page titled with a single word, steady. Cost. Absent. Mend. On the back flap, he taped a note, inspired by someone who walked quieter than most. Visitors kept coming. They didn't speak loudly. Some wept. Most just walked the length of the trail, stopping by the bench or kneeling by markers whose names had once vanished. The brass plate from Gant remained untouched, polished now by passers-by without instruction. Rita kept the booth reserved indefinitely. She eventually framed the Ghost Division patch that had frayed nearly to nothing. It now hung near the register, beside the medal, Elsie's charcoal drawing, and a small photograph someone had once taken, Jonah, standing at attention, not in uniform, but in the middle of Miller Creek, hand on a nameplate, hat in hand. The town never formally declared a holiday in his honor. But every November 11th, someone would leave his booth untouched at the diner, his bench swept clean of leaves, and 1 cup of black coffee left steaming on the wall at Miller Creek. No card. No name. Just the act. Silence remembers.